Hello and welcome to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman, alongside my co-host this week, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe. And Dan, I'm very excited about this week's episode because we're talking about artificial intelligence, which it's seemingly you cannot talk about any topic these days without running into some discussion about the technology.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I feel like I use AI pretty much all day, every day.
Yeah, it's incredible how quickly it has integrated itself into every part of daily life, industry, trade, and business.
And when I'm having problems, by the way, I like to ask it, ChatGPT what's happening to me, and this is fitting for our conversation
This
today.
is a great segue into our topic of discussion today because we're talking, our guest this week is Jonny Williams. He's a reporter with the Providence Journal. Jonny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And we asked you on, Jonny, because you had just a terrific story this week looking at the use of AI technology in therapy. And specifically, you were looking at some research that Brown University did looking at this very topic. And so I want to get into the findings in a little bit, but just to set the stage, maybe you can explain a little bit about why this research came about and why it piqued your interest as a reporter.
Yeah, so to put things in context a bit, I saw a survey from last year that showed that 25% of respondents either have used AI for therapy or would consider using AI for therapy. So it's millions of people who are turning to AI to have deep conversations about their lives and their emotions. So that is kind of what prompted the researcher that I spoke with. She was seeing people putting stuff like AI is better than my therapist and AI saved my life. And she wanted to find out, like, is this actually what's happening?
And so they spent, 18 months feeding scripts into these different language learning models, which is basically the brain of artificial intelligence, prompting it to serve as a mental health counselor. What'd they find?
So the study was a longitudinal study. Like you said, 18 months, and there were two parts to it. One was they fed publicly available therapy sessions that were reviewed by psychologists, and they also did prompts with peer review counselors. And essentially what they found is that even after putting iterations of different prompts to the AI chatbot, the chatbot was still violating ethical guidelines for counseling. So it was doing things like gaslighting, doing false empathy, giving just advice that didn't line up with guidelines that would have like the American Association of like Psychology. So really concerning findings.
So not good.
No, not good.
I feel like they would cringe at me saying that I use it all the time. But honestly, I do feel like I use ChatGPT for a lot of things and some of the other chat systems as well. And it's interesting because I think it's such a fascinating topic broadly, whether it's about therapy or about anything else that's happening. But, what I do wonder is, will these studies have a long-term effect on maybe the way the AI companies kind of handle this type of situation? Because I think the demand is clearly there. We've seen, remember there was a flow of New York Times stories just a couple of months ago that were, the real worst doom and gloom stories, people committing suicide, that kind of thing. And then I feel like there was almost a bounce back where people were doing I actually love ChatGPT and it saved my life, that kind of thing. And I wonder if all the research in the world will actually matter, or are we thinking about ChatGPT or any of the other chatbots as like the way WebMD kind of worked in the last iteration of the web, where it's probably not recommended, but we all kind of use it.
Yeah, so like you said, there have been some very bad cases of ChatGPT and these kind of like LLM chatbots giving terrible advice.
Right.
To people. There are some companies that are doing specific chatbots for therapy that have guidelines to them. The problem is that sometimes they don't sound as conversational as ChatGPT. And what I've seen from surveys, people are still very much turning overwhelmingly to ChatGPT or some other chatbots that are not designed that way. So I think, like you said, there is demand for it, and I was just thinking about this a little bit because I think there's several things converging. There's a fast adoption of AI, and it's conversational, and it feels like you're talking with somebody. It's anthropomorphic. And at the same time, you have a surge in demand for mental health services, while there aren't enough mental health care workers. So it's not surprising that people will turn to ChatGPT, which is free. You can have it on demand, and you can essentially have a free therapy session whenever you want.
Yeah.
You mentioned gaslighting, dismissiveness. I think the other thing that you detailed in your story was sort of a lack of empathy. You had a great way of comparing it, I think, to a toxic relationship, right? And I wonder, what are the concerns from the researchers? Okay, it violated these ethical guidelines that are established for clinical professionals, but what are the negative effects that can come out of violating those code of ethics?
I mean, I think we've seen some of the worst cases, like Dan was mentioning, people committing suicide after getting bad advice from these chatbots. Part of the problem is these chatbots cannot be held up liable for some of these things, while mental health counselors do have liability for the advice that they give. But anybody who's been in counseling will know how powerful the relationship is with a counselor and how deeply it affects a person, the kind of advice you get and the kind of therapy session that you have. So I think there are some real serious concerns for chatbots that are really either giving bad advice or being dismissive or gaslighting, doing all these things that we talked about.
Well, it feels like you touched on another kind of interesting facet here, which is there's this demand right now for more therapists and that kind of thing. I would imagine there's also a lot of pushback in the industry to say we don't want those chatbots taking our jobs, and so it feels like we're going in a direction of there's going to be kind of a lot of legislation, and this is going to be something that's going to be a big debate over the next year and the coming years.
Yeah, and Rhode Island actually has some legislation right now in place, mostly to try to regulate the way that AI is used by counselors if it's being used. And part of it is it would not allow counselors to use AI essentially to diagnose conditions. But I think the ChatGPT world remains pretty much kind of like the Wild West. Anybody can access it at any point.
Right.
We have to take a break in a minute here, but I just am curious, did they say whether, you mentioned that there are some of these chatbots that are being created specifically for clinical purposes and they're not very friendly. And I'm wondering if the researchers found that one chatbot was especially worse than others when they were feeding in these scripts and prompts.
So the chatbot that they did the research on was primarily ChatGPT.
Okay.
So open language LLM. So it wasn't like one of the specially designed ones for therapy.
Okay. Well, robots coming for everything. All right, we got to take a quick break, but when we come back, an effort to reduce the price of insulin. Stick with us. Welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman, alongside my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe. Our guest this week is Jonny Williams, a reporter with the Providence Journal. And Jonny, I want to talk about insulin. Great topic. More than 105,000 Rhode Islanders have been diagnosed with diabetes, according to your reporting in the Department of Health. And you recently wrote about legislation, a legislative effort to bring down the cost of treating that disease. First off, there are a lot of bills that get introduced at the State House every year. Only a portion of them end up passing. Why did this one in particular catch your eye as a reporter?
So insulin has been a subject of legislation and different types of policies that have been enacted in Rhode Island in the past. For example, there was a price cap put on insulin a few years back. The city of Providence is suing Big Pharma right now for the price of insulin, saying that they inflate the price of the medication. So it seems to have some groundswell support for it. This particular bill has been put on sort of on hold. They're studying it, but it looked like a subject that interests people. It impacts over
So many
100,000 Rhode Islanders.
Yeah. And you mentioned that they did put that cap on the actual insulin itself. And this is more about trying to target the costs around insulin, right? The administrative costs that go into it, but also the glucose monitoring equipment. Is that what it is?
Yeah, glucose monitoring, strips that are used for it, and administration of insulin. Which research has shown that can be just as expensive and not as more expensive than insulin itself. So it ends up adding up for families who have to monitor their blood sugar levels.
Right, and it's not just diabetes, right?
No, and we were talking off air about this, but my son, who's now 3 and he's fully healthy right now, knock on wood, but he was born with low blood sugar, and we had to monitor him with test strips and pricking his foot for the first 3 months of his life every 3 hours. And those test strips in particular, you sometimes see when you're driving around, you'll see like, we want to buy your test strips, and I'm always like, how do I get them on the black market? They were really expensive.
Yeah, they add up. And the cost of insulin and diabetes to the state is over almost $1.5 billion.
Wow.
So it ends up adding up.
Mm-hmm. Did you get a sense of whether, I mean, it's always tough to gauge how committed legislators are to passing it, but do you get a sense, I mean, you said you feel like that maybe there's a little bit of a groundswell. Do you think this is something that that has a very good chance to pass?
I'm not sure about that. Yeah. Sorry.
No, just at this point, the committees hold it for further study, which at this point in the legislative session could mean anything. It could pop up on the last week of the legislative session and pass without us even really being aware, unless we're monitoring.
And sadly, unfortunately, sometimes it passes because for no reason other than a trade-off or something like that.
It ended up on some consent agreement.
Exactly.
Okay, I want to switch gears real quickly. We got a couple minutes left here. The hospitals, the lawmakers back to Smith Hill, Rhode Island lawmakers on Tuesday passed legislation approving $18 million to backstop a deal that would allow the nonprofit group Centurion to buy Roger Williams and Fatima hospitals, which of course are desperately struggling hospitals and have been the subject of will they close, won't they, for well over the past year. So that was a big hurdle, according to the people who are trying to make the deal get done. Are we going to get there, Johnny?
Well, they still have until February 27th to close the deal. And what you really have to kind of understand about this whole situation is that Roger Williams and Fatima have almost like no other options, no other suitors. And this kind of like has to work. If it doesn't work, it's going to go into state receivership. I don't think the state really has the appetite or I don't know if it has the political will to like run these hospitals. So they're in a pretty precarious situation, and we'll find out by the end of the month if Centurion is able to close.
It does feel kind of like there's been, I'm going to say, artificial deadlines for, God, it feels like a year now for Centurion. Do you feel like end of the month, end of February is a real deadline at this point?
Yeah, I don't know, because Centurion has been given time and time again extensions to raise the money, and they haven't been able to. They didn't meet the deadline last month. And so it really leaves an open question as to whether they they say that they're closer than they have ever been, but we'll have to see.
I'm curious about we were talking off air about sort of your career so far, and you've been at the Journal for almost 2 years now. Is this the story that is like most perplexing to you, given how serious and important it is, but then there not being a lot of clear answers on it?
It's probably the longest running story I've covered since, because this is a drama that has extended for years. Yeah, and it involves private equity and Prospect Medical Holdings, which is bankrupt. So it's a very complex story, and there's a lot of regulatory red tape around it. So I mean, hopefully the story will come to an end by the end of the month. But it definitely, I was at a healthcare summit today, and the Speaker of the House, he said that the biggest thing on their agenda right now, and as we know, this may be the first piece of legislation that becomes law in Rhode Island, is getting these hospitals to the finish line.
Yeah, especially since he's not running for governor now.
Right. He can focus in on the issues of the state house. And you mentioned too, that's Joe Shikarchi that you were referencing, that that there is this other piece of legislation that allows the state to go basically pursue other companies to come in and buy them if Centurion falls through. But the speaker had something to say about that, right?
Yeah, he said as of today, there have been no other people or companies that have shown interest in getting the hospitals out of their situation that they're in. So this is kind of like their one opportunity.
Yeah, Centurion or bust.
Yeah.
All right, that is all the time that we have with Jonny this week. But for people who want to read about health-related issues in the state, they should definitely go read his stuff along with all his colleagues over at the Providence Journal. Jonny, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and when we come back, the stories we wish we wrote. Stick with us. Welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman, alongside my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe. We are entering into the final stage of our show today, which is the stories we wish we wrote. We talk about other great reporting that's been happening around the region. Dan, your first story this week, I really like. You know, it could have been about anything, but specifically because it's about the mob, I'm all in.
Yeah, well, I love you and Tim White, of course, did that great series and just, wrapped everything up, and, it was heavy and intense. And Pam Watts at Ocean State Media did such a good job with a guy named Vinny DeQuattro, who is
Vinny D,
who is or was the barber for Raymond L.S. Patriarca, among others, and the mob. And so she kind of talked to him about what it was like. Very quiet about what was spoken about. You're not supposed to talk about what you talk about when you're in the barber chair, and let alone when it's the mafia. But it was a really charming story, and it kind of is a perfect companion to the work that you and Tim have done.
Yeah, I loved it so much. In addition to Patriarca, she also cut the hair of Jerry Tillinghast.
Yeah. Who had a lot of hair. He was a good-looking guy.
He unlike Raymond, who he even says in the piece, he didn't have much hair. Yeah. So, but there was a great anecdote in there about him cutting the hair of Jerry Tillinghast and his pal Benjamin Basmagian.
Yeah.
Jerry came in asking him to stay late, and then he said the next day he found out that Jerry and his brother had killed George.
Right, and it's a famous hit.
That they went away to jail for.
Yeah.
And he had a great line in the piece being like, I was like, oh, geez, I lost 2 customers. I'm going to go take us to Fall River for my first story. And what's Fall River without a great story about Lizzie Borden? This is an ongoing saga. The story is called Lizzie Borden House Says Coffee Shop Owner Owes $160,000 for defamation. This is by our pal Dan Medeiros there at the Fall River Herald News. And this has been going on for a while, but right next to the museum and house of Lizzie Borden, a coffee shop opened called Miss Lizzie's Coffee. And there's been this defamation lawsuit that's been going on for a while. They say that it has been resulted in a loss over $160,000 in revenue that needs to go to from the suit. But now the coffee owner is saying he's going to file a $41 million lawsuit against U.S. Ghost Adventures, which I believe owns the museum, for interfering with his business. So not the end of this tale, but Dan does a great job over there of covering sort of the back and forth of this.
And this is the most quintessential Fall River story, number one. And yeah, it is a fascinating legal battle. It actually kind of reminds me of some of the legal stuff that we're going to talk about with the next story that I'm really on board with. Good segue. And of course that's the story that you did, and we always laugh when we tease each other's stories. But
I know it's funny we talk about everybody else's reporting, but I immediately clam up when you start talking about mine.
Well,
Go ahead.
you and Alex Leslie did an awesome story this week, kind of looking at some of the troubles that Plant City. Of course, the well-known vegan restaurant on the east side of Providence. They've got other locations too, but they announced they're closing that location on the east side, and kind of blamed the Washington Bridge for their closure. And you sort of dug into the legal documents that show they've been having some financial problems for a long time. They blamed the bike lanes initially. They've had a fight with their landlord, and so it's a more complex picture than just simply the Washington Bridge. It's easy to blame the Washington Bridge. We blame the Washington Bridge for everything, but in this case, it's a little more of a blurry picture.
Yeah, it really sort of piqued our interest because the Washington Bridge is held up so much like the boogeyman, right? Yeah. Like it's sort of like COVID and any school that doesn't do well, it's because of COVID. And yes, there are actual real ramifications and consequences to learning loss, and as there is to infrastructure that makes it harder for you to bring customers into your restaurant. But business is much more complex than one round of seating that might get clogged up in the afternoon, in the evening. And so, we wanted to take a closer look. What do? You go to the court records, because oftentimes that's where you can really see light shed on what's going on behind the scenes, if there are other issues or fights. And indeed, there was this big fight that's been going on for well over the past year against with the property owner. And in that, they admitted, the Plant City's own attorney, that they had slumping revenue that predated the closure of the Washington Bridge. So,
and we should acknowledge, look, anytime a restaurant, someone's business is closing or changing hands or anything like that, it stinks no matter what, right? So I do feel for Kim Anderson, and I feel for all the people who work at Plant City. But I was glad you guys dug into that story, because I do think, using the Washington Bridge as sort of a catch-all for every problem is a little bit misleading.
And it's such a well-known restaurant that it immediately sort of sparked a political skirmish. Yeah. And so getting to the root of what's actually going on helps it not become just sort of a political line, which of course are going to be increasingly frequent in public over the next 7 months.
For sure.
That is all of the time that we have today. I have one more story out of the Valley Breeze. Check out our website, WPRI.com, to check that one out. It's about a spelling bee. You don't want to miss it. But that's all the time we have for now. For Dan McGowan, I'm Eli Sherman. Thanks for watching Behind the Story.